Hi, everyone. Welcome to Recruitment in View, the podcast linked to the recruitment industry and everything around recruitment. Today's subject is an interesting one for me because we're going to talk about employer of record, or commonly used as an acronym of EOR. With me to talk about this important subject is someone who specializes in it, which is Aaron Kazan, a senior manager from Playroll. So welcome to the podcast, Aaron. Thanks for having us. First of all, let's start with a simple educational question, because not everyone's familiar with employer of record. Everyone's going to think that's HR, which is what I do. Essentially, it is in a way, but talk people through how it's different.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Colin, and thanks for having me on the podcast. Maybe as a brief introduction to employer of record, to put it really simply, we're a company that enables other companies to legally and compliantly employ talent anywhere in the world as a global employer of record without the need for setting up local infrastructure, local entities, basically dealing with payroll, taxes, benefits, everything that has to do with real employment without the need for companies to go out and set up their own infrastructure in other countries in order to achieve that.
Well
To add
put.
one,
Yeah, go on.
just to give a practical example, because oftentimes when having these conversations, people maybe still don't get maybe the penny still doesn't drop. But a basic example of it is thinking about it like this. If you're a company in the UK and you're looking to hire maybe let's call it an engineer or any role for that matter, and you've now, had someone interesting reach out to you over LinkedIn, or you found an interesting profile, and that person happens to be, maybe in a different country in Europe or wherever they might be. Your immediate thought is, how do I actually go about employing this person? And the options are, setting up your own entity, maybe contracting with the individual, which might not be as compliant. And an employer of record really does fill that gap. So we would act as the third party. We employ that individual through our entity infrastructure on behalf of our clients and take care of basically end-to-end compliance, ensuring that they are legally employed, that their payroll happens timeously and correctly, that taxes and benefits are adhered to. So it's basically being able to hire anywhere the same way that you would in your country without having to go through the hassle of setting up the infrastructure yourself.
Lovely put. Well put. So the only other thing or terms I would use that might sort of help people get their head around this is like a term turnkey solution is often sort of thrown out there. It is or a wraparound service. So effectively, you're doing everything on behalf of a business for them, except for employing them. You're doing that on their behalf, essentially. So what's interesting when you talk about compliance as a comment, there's often compliance issues around particularly the construction sector, whether people are employed, self-employed. We won't go that for this podcast, that's another discussion. But interestingly, when we look at employer of record, they are an employee of that organization, so it definitely keeps it, from a compliance perspective, watertight. It's the very easiest way of engaging someone, regardless of classification. So yeah, it's definitely an easier solution. So I suppose let's put further context to employer of record. How do people use it? So if someone wants to, we'll go over to your engineer. It's quite a nice example, right? Someone wants an engineer. The engineer is based in, I don't know, let's pick a random country, Poland, for example, just to put it out there. How would they go about that engagement? How does that work?
Yeah. So when it comes to actually engaging with that individual, so we partner with a lot of recruitment companies, as an example, that would reach out to us on behalf of their clients, and that's how we get a lot of our business. But we also, in a general case, you might have a company that's just found this engineer through their own recruitment motions, and now they're ready to employ that individual. So they would reach out to the employer of record. The first steps would be, discerning and understanding actually what that looks like to employ that person in that market. So one thing that's often overlooked is things like employer contributions. What is the actual cost of employing this individual? You might have already aligned on a salary with the individual, a package, but when it comes to understanding the actual cost to company and what the employer contributions look like, what the necessary compliance elements are, those things are where you would lean on an employer of record. Maybe not to use the Poland example, but there's many countries in LATAM, for example, that as a part of the onboarding process, you need to do a pre-employment medical check. And these are only things that you figure out when you're actually, delving into what are the requirements in that specific country. So first step is identifying the talent. Once you've identified the talent, it's working through what is the actual gross salary and what are the costs involved, and what does that actually look like to employ that individual. And then working with an employer of record is relatively easy given the fact that the employer of record already has the infrastructure set up. So providing the employer of record with all the basic information to then go and draft a local employment agreement for that individual. That would then be sent over to the individual. The individual contracts with, let's say, for example, at Playroll, our entity in country in Poland. So they would sign a Playroll Poland contract. We would have a already existing master services agreement with our client that dictates our responsibilities handling payroll, taxes, compliance, etc. And the client's responsibility for, I guess, paying us the amount so that we can carry out the payroll on a month-to-month basis. And the process is pretty streamlined from there. I think one point to add on to what you said in terms of how the relationship works, the employee day to day is the company's employee. So we have nothing to do with the performance management of those individuals, what they're doing on a day to day basis. So they really are an employee for all intents and purposes within your organization, without the headache of worrying about, are they employed compliantly? Has there been a labor law change? Has there been a tax implication that might change the situation? And from there, the employment starts, the employee starts working, and then the employer of record would handle the month-to-month payroll, and everything from that point as well.
Okay. So let's look at this from a very operational point of view and a little bit more commercially. So we've got an idea of how it can work. That they can be seconded to you essentially, and you can get the benefit of that talent. But there are times when you have to think about talent in different ways. One could be cost. Let's be honest. Some parts of the world are more cost effective in hiring than others. I'm not going to say that's a positive or a negative. I'm just going to state fact openly around that for people to think about how they want to utilize that, I guess. But the one thing that is one thing that people don't think about is, and I know this firsthand, when you get solutions that aren't necessarily in the same time zone, there can be problems with that. So it depends on what you can actually think about more strategically around what you're trying to achieve with that talent and where that talent in the world is. So we use a location. I think, are you in South Africa yourself?
Yes, I'm
For
based in
example,
South Africa.
we're in a similar time zone, right? It's not massively different. Europe is, right? Sometimes there's massive benefits of being around the world that can give you that ability to do so. There is also a difference in having, I suppose, different time zones. So I know someone who set up a recruitment business that had someone based in the US, someone based, I think it was in India off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that, but the ability to have resourcing, which is what he used it for, 24 hours around the clock, meant he was so ahead of the curve of his competition that he literally could. And I mean, he only had one person, but one person in every part of the world to be able to resource, to constantly get hold of people was a massive benefit. To be honest, I know before even employer of record, people used to hire people part-time to do evening and weekend calls to candidates because they wanted to get hold of them. Quite difficult to fill in today's market because people don't want to do nights, but they want to work during the day in a different part of the world. They can. And globalism, in that sense, the ability to globalize your business is of strategic importance, right? If I can say that word. Strategic, there we go. Because it allows you to think about how you can use employer of record from a more commercially savvy perspective of what you're trying to do with your business, or how you can be I suppose, the competitive advantage in this sort of example. So I suppose, do you have any particular examples? That was one that was recruitment. I thought that was very relevant for this podcast and this audience, but I might look at a construction one in a minute. But is there any other industries that you found particularly that it's good for, or any particular industries actually employer records not good for? Because I think that's also important to know how it could work or how it doesn't work in certain markets.
Yes, it's actually a really interesting question, and I've been involved in the revenue and sales side of the business for about 5 years. And one of the interesting things about employer of record, or one of the biggest challenges, is that our total addressable market is massive. Any industry could technically use an employer of record. It has more to do with the appetite of a company wanting to, like you're describing, strategically expand internationally, whether that be to service a specific market, expand into a specific market, or on the other side that you've already touched on, companies and industries that have very expensive talent in a specific country, and that might want to look for the same type of resources either around the corner from a geographic perspective or all the way across the world. So, in South Africa, we have, incredible talent in South Africa, and given the economic state of the country and, the currency, etc., you could find incredible talent in South Africa for a fraction of the cost while still well paying your talent in country. So cost savings is definitely, one of the use cases. Strategic growth is another use case. Relocation is definitely another use case. So we, as an employer of record, and many global employer of records, offer visa sponsorship and relocation services in many countries where it's possible. And maybe just to add, it's not really about the industry. I think companies or people that are watching this to think about, is there a use case for employer of record for my business? I think they should be thinking about, am I in an industry where there's talent is scarce? Am I in an industry where talent is expensive? Or am I in an industry where the talent for the roles that I'm looking to fill is actually based in another country? And those are the roles that, those are the use cases and the industries that it's most relevant for.
Well, it's funny you say that at the end there, because that goes back to the comment I was going to make about construction, which is linked to a lot of those, which is a lack of talent. Talents typically come from abroad. It has its complexities. So one thing employer of record can't do is blue collar on the ground talent. I would openly say that is it is limitation. It can't be within the UK. If it was a UK business trying to bring talent to here, sadly can't. But it doesn't mean that you can't give allocation to work outside of the UK for projects. And I think certainly one of the common skill sets we've never had enough of is decent engineers. It was funny you mentioned engineer at the very beginning, because that is a talent shortage we do have. Design engineers and things like that are in short supply. So as much as I'd love to say, yes, we could bring all our talent to the UK to work on a building site and do something, in reality, some of that might be offshored, is another term you could use here, which would make a lot of sense too in certain cases.
Yeah.
Because as much as most traditional industry thinks the person boots on the ground is the best solution, I think particularly the UK is quite unique, and this is a very UK audience. But the UK is unique for two reasons. When we voted Brexit, for those who did, sadly I didn't, because I knew we'd do a bad job of it openly. It's a true story. But the reality was we'd closed a talent pool but not filled that talent gap. And so there are massive pockets in the UK. Construction's one of them. There's lots of different industries, right? IT, nursing, care. There's a number of sectors where there are pockets of black holes that have just imploded with skills that we don't have. So employer of record is definitely an interesting one to think about how you can plug a gap for a business. Even if it's only temporary, actually, you could use it as a solution to upskill or nurture talent that you're trying to bring through using employer of record as that gap or that go-between. The one thing we have to talk about, I did warn you before we started recording, which was, I think a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon of AI. I think it's a great thing. I did an episode with Ian Tomlin on AI prior to this recording. And in terms of AI, I think it's got a lot of potential, but there are lots of restrictions in AI. How do you think that relationship's going to play out in the current and in the future with employer of record versus AI, particularly in tech?
Yeah, so I can talk about it in a few different directions. Maybe we can start with the most obvious or the most topical, which is AI replacing a lot of roles and jobs in
Yeah,
tech.
yeah.
Does that cause a risk? And you were hiring your engineers abroad. Now you're just using AI. You don't necessarily have to use an employer of record ostensibly. I think we're a while away from that, in my opinion. I think there's lots of science in the market. Often, use a relatable example of companies like Anthropic and ChatGPT actually hiring outbound SDRs. Right? My feed is flooded with how to replace your outbound function with AI, but the companies themselves that are building the technology are still hiring for those type of roles. At the same
Interesting.
time, like I think it's just going to be there'll definitely be a decrease in the number of roles needed within a business, but the specific skill set that you're looking for, take an AI engineer as an example, might actually not be in your country. So I think the scarcity of the roles that you're actually looking for in your business will increase. So I think employer of record has a big role to play there. Another element of why I don't think employer of record's going away anytime soon is employer of record is much broader than just the technology that companies use to facilitate the running their payroll and the tech side, the B2B tech side of what we do, the software as a service side. It's a huge infrastructure of 180 entities, understanding the local labor laws and being able to deal with terminations, etc. A lot of which can be assisted with AI. But having if you're a company looking to go global or to hire your first person internationally, you're probably going to lean on an expert infrastructure as opposed to just tools to give you the answers without being able to execute. So I think employer of records are positioned quite well for the AI boom, given the fact that they'll enhance it. It'll definitely be different. So it'll be an enhancement than anything.
You see, for me, I always think of AI as the greatest thing that will give you the opportunity to get rid of your day to day, but would never be the solution to a project or a problem you've got to deal with. Because the reality is it takes so long to train, make sure it's not hallucinating, make sure that you're getting what you need from AI, right? By the time you built that, the project would probably be over. So in reality, the great thing about employer of record I see is very much, I've got a problem I've got to deal with. Is there a solution here where I could quickly deal with that, get that skill in, and that skill might solve the problem I've got today or the problem I need to solve today for tomorrow. It's better to get a person to do that always than it is a machine in reality. Or you could use employer of record to train your machine, is another way of looking at it, right? There's no reason why you couldn't get them to train an AI bot to do something for your business, because that's another stumbling block with AI. We're digressing into AI, but all the technology in the world, you need someone to train it and know what to do with it, which is likely not to be you because you're busy doing something else, and don't have the dedicated time. So it doesn't matter which way you swing it. I still think there's a project to be had that needs an investment
Yeah.
to go and do,
And you,
essentially.
you talk you talk about projects. I think one of the big values of working with an employer of record is time to value. So where in a normal scenario you're looking at a 3-month project to employ in a new territory and to set up, or sometimes 3 to 6 to 12 months to set up entities, to have all the infrastructure in
Yeah.
place. Yes, AI could be a great skill and tool set to help you understand, okay, what needs to be done in order to get to that end state. Whereas using an employer of record with the infrastructure already set up allows you to employ that person within a few days, right? So I think it's time to value that AI could assist you with the process, but fundamentally the infrastructure layer is something that's very hard to replace with AI, because fundamentally it still needs to be carried out.
How do you find I suppose the integration of people that are engaged with employer of record or EOR, right? So maybe they're part of a wider team, or maybe you want to do a team where you've got someone's, let's say you've hired 5 people. They're from different countries. You've got 5 different engagements with them. How do you sort of integrate and make that work from I suppose, from a support to a business perspective? Because they might be a little bit worried if they've got someone in Spain, someone in Poland, someone Brazil, someone somewhere else, right? How they'd make that work. Is there, have you got any advice around that kind of thing for?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to the appetite of a business wanting to actually truly be global. I think even on a macro scale, if the company did have actual offices in the different territories, and not just individuals, they would experience similar challenges.
Yep.
I can talk to that at Playroll. We have offices in a bunch of places around the world. and remote employees and hybrid employees, and you still face the same challenges of distribution fundamentally. So I think the same principles that work for companies that are distributed in office will be the same thing that will be the same principles that will work for companies that are distributed remotely, which is principles of over communication, having really good alignment, having software and tools that enable you to really understand what's going on in these different territories. But it basically comes down to the appetite of a business really wanting to truly be global. And I don't think it's something that's necessarily unique to leveraging an employer of record to be global as opposed to just wanting to be global in general. But all the general principles that would apply to a business that wants to be global would be the same as having talent spread out in different countries.
So let's say I've got a project. Let's say it's a tech project for the benefit of an example. I've got a project, a development project. I'm not going to use AI or anything like that, although they might do in the project itself. I want to get 5 developers. They're going to build a new app for me or whatever it happens to be. Do you have anything where you could say, look, if you're looking for this kind of skill set, these are countries commonly where you can get these skills. So I know South Africa personally do have a lot of tech skills, a very good university there and things like that. But do you have any information you can share around that? And then also, let's say they wanted to think about budget, costs. Have you got some information around that? What the total cost for engagement is in each different, we'll call it jurisdiction or entity or country?
So I think top employer of records like Playroll have various tools to assist companies with this decision. So, for example, the first tool that we would have internally is a compensation benchmarking tool. So once you've decided and identified which talent pools you want to go into, which is often something that an employer of record can advise on, let's say it's tech talent, they would give you the 3 biggest hubs or the 3 most successful hubs for finding the type of talent that you're looking for. Cost calculator tools is something that's really important, something that we have at Playroll, where you can put in what the cost to company you want, what you've budgeted for, and see a breakdown of the employer contributions, what the employee's net salary would be, a whole range of tools before making the actual decision, I would say, which really come in handy. And that basically enables you to strategically make your decision as opposed to saying, I want to hire the best developers in Poland because that's where I've heard the best developers are. And, from a business perspective, maybe not analyzing that maybe there's other countries where there's as big of a talent pool where the compensation benchmark might be the same or lower and the employer contributions might be, on par. So I think there's a lot of things to consider, and companies like Playroll or really top employer of records will have the tools to enable you to make the decision as opposed to just guessing it and seeing how it goes.
So one last, I suppose, again, quite operational question here, but let's say we've talked about how good it can be. Let's say it doesn't go so well. You have found someone, it turned out they weren't very good or not doing the job that you expected them to do. What support can you offer a business in that? I mean, it inevitably happens in any kind of talent, right? It doesn't always work out. So how do you manage that, bearing in mind they're not the employee of them, they're your employee on this employee of record. So how do you support business in that situation?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and it's often an overlooked point. I mean, an employer of record, the selling point is that it is actually your employee for all intents and purposes, right? Yes, in the back end, we are the employer on record, and we hold certain liabilities on from that being the case. But it's something that's often overlooked, in comparison to staffing or outsourcing, where the talent necessarily it isn't necessarily your responsibility, and you're actually looking for a service more than a talent that's actually part of your business. So it's a really good point, and terminations do become a big part of what we do, right? Running compliant terminations are as important as running compliant onboardings. So when it comes to termination, it's a partnership that works hand in hand between the employer of record and
Okay,
the
nice.
company. So the
Yep.
company would reach out and say, look, it's not going well with this individual, or we're looking to terminate on the basis of X, Y, and Z. And our legal team will actually liaise and discuss, whether it's actually possible to terminate on the basis that the company wants to terminate on. Because fundamentally, this employee is a full-time employee with full-time employment rights. So I think it is something to consider. even from a country perspective, where you look to hire. Countries like France are infamous for being very difficult
Yes,
to assimilate.
very well known. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Their rules are very difficult. Germany's also challenging, I hear, country-wise. I mean, the UK, funny enough, is having more and more law being rolled out, particularly next year. But yeah, from a HR perspective, totally get that. Um,
Maybe
so,
just to add, benefit
go
of
on.
working with an record is that from a legal standpoint, you don't have to go and do the homework. The employer of record will guide you and say, well, this is the process that we have to follow in order to terminate this individual. And although it won't be like, switching off a button and your employee's gone, and, fundamentally these are human beings, we would, liaise and explain exactly what the process is. The employer of record would have to handle certain things, being the legal employer of record. That might be sending certain letters or, putting certain agreements in place. But that is a huge benefit of working with an employer of record, that they can actually deal with the termination as if you had the local knowledge to do it yourself.
So I think my last question to close on, we've gone through a lot of information for people to take on board. And I think there's huge amounts of things that people can reflect on as how to strategically use it. I think that's the benefit. If they can picture where it fits into their workforce, their ecosystem of what they do from a talent perspective, there's a huge opportunity for them to leverage something like this. And I definitely think personally there is a huge opportunity in the UK because we have, go back to the Brexit comment, right? We've definitely closed our borders, right? Which is fine, but we still need certain skill sets that are just not in the UK freely, particularly around talent like tech, actually, more so than ever. So I suppose crystal ball moment, if you like. We know there's going to be a rise in the UK around compliance and demands of classification. Probably not for this podcast, but generally speaking, a lot more laws is going to create, hiring is going to get more stricter. They're going to use a lot more contractors in the UK. It's going to definitely, the gig economy is definitely going to start rising in mentality. We've got the rise in AI, possibly the rise of employee of record externally. Is there anything else or anything that you think that you have seen or things that people should reflect on where this is all going? Because it's all coming away from traditional. The job for life died a long time ago in the UK, but still kind of exists for the very few. But that sort of gig economy style, very different engagement types, is definitely growing momentum. What else do you see, or would you just agree with all of that? Or where's your sort of viewpoint? I'm intrigued to know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the things that you've said in terms of the rise in the gig economy. Maybe I could call it a change in the employment landscape. Playroll itself, we are positioning ourselves as a global employment management company, not necessarily just an employer of record, because employer of
Okay, nice.
record is just a piece of the puzzle, right? We offer global payroll solutions, contractor management solutions, and I think the crystal ball moment, and maybe something for your listeners to think about, is if you're not thinking about being a global company in some shape or form, then you're definitely falling behind, right? In the UK, that could be because you aren't able to tap into the talent that you need. In other countries, it might be because there just isn't the talent that you're actually looking for in the actual country. So I think what I'd leave your listeners with is the days of 5-6 years ago, when we were selling employer of record, it was very educational, right? And global workforce solutions were very educational. It was almost that only the biggest companies, the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world, were the ones that could tap into international talent and have a global workforce. Whereas in today's day and age, with the solutions that are at play, any company can be global, and pretty much every company has to be global in order to be competitive. They have to be thinking about how they're running their global compliance, their global payroll, their gig economy management from a contractor management perspective, and tapping into full-time skills abroad. So I think the future of global workforce management and the future of building companies is global, and the days of employer of record and global payroll solutions just being an aspiration is those days are over. And it's more about, in order to stay afloat, you do need to have it as a part of your general HR tech stack or your general HR operation stack in order to be competitive.
It's interesting. There's two more observations just to echo what you said, which I think was lovely, well put. Is if we look at most businesses in the world, you've got the big globals; they're going to stay there. Medium businesses are shrinking, but what happens when you shrink as a smaller business? You are cutting your overheads to be more cost effective. That's where your margins, it's being squeezed, is going to stay there. But I always say, I'm reading a book about it at the moment, which is a book called Company of One. There's a long story to this book, and I'd highly recommend the book. I'll put a link on the description if I can. But the Book of One talks about a company of one doesn't mean there's only one employee. It's actually how you utilize your margin, how you're cost effective. And actually, it is the difference sometimes between businesses that are, stuck in this wanting to believe that scale is important, but actually it's how you cost effectively do that that makes you competitive, but can still deliver a fraction of the price or percentage less. That means that is the difference between you making a profit or not in some cases, because margins can be quite small. It's really looking at it from a very commercial standpoint. Particularly talent is a commercialized thing, right? We have to accept that you're not going to pay twice as much as your competitor for the same amount of skill. So it is a commercial thing, talent. And the reality is you can only be good if you've got the talent. So it's that chicken and an egg. You want the best talent at the best price because that's how you're better than your competition, in a nutshell. It's just trying to do that in a changing landscape means your strategy's got to change openly. Anyway, I'm not going to preach the converted here. So thank you for coming on the podcast. There's a lot we've covered here. We could easily do 2 hours of this, no doubt. But what I will say is every case is going to be different to a business. So it's easier sometimes for them to pick up a phone or send an email, ask the question, and I'm sure you'd give them great advice, Aaron. So first of all, how would people be able to reach out to you if they've got any questions or would like to know more about Employer of Record?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to drop me a connect and a message. And in terms of reaching out to Playroll, we've got a pretty informative website with country guides, some free tools in terms of the cost calculator that I mentioned. So feel free to, if you are interested or do have a need, to either go directly to me or through our website. We'd be happy to engage or even talk about any of these topics, just for informative purposes or conversational purposes.
Sounds great. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a great episode. And we'll speak again soon. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Colin.